What do you think an assassin for the ultra-rich looks like? They do not use guns. They do not use knives. Those things are too loud, too crude, too shaped like crime. The perfect murder weapon looks exactly like the air purifier in your room, blinking a green light beneath the words safe. The problem is, it is safe only for the person who has just walked out the door, not for the victim slowly suffocating inside. The cremation furnace had already been started. Behind the steel door, the temperature rose by measured degrees, steady and indifferent. Outside, the dead man's family stood in a dense black row. No one cried aloud. No one stepped forward to touch the coffin. They stood there as if waiting for an administrative procedure to end, not saying farewell to a human being leaving the world. The funeral home attendant handed me the documents with both hands. The death certificate, the hospital's red seal, the family's signed consent, and the cause of death typed neatly across the page. Acute myocardial infarction. Everything was so complete it felt chilling, as if Victor Langford's death lacked only one final motion, pushing him into the fire. My name is Dr. Evelyn Cross, forensic pathologist for the Ravenshaw Police Department, and under ordinary procedure, I should not have been there. The dead man had a file. The family had approved cremation. The hospital had certified the death. For a 63-year-old businessman with a long history of heart disease, found dead in his private office after a night of overwork, everything sounded so reasonable that there was almost no room left for doubt. That reasonableness was exactly what bothered me. Deaths that are prepared too completely often resemble a room that has been scrubbed clean. The cleaner it is, the more you want to know what was erased before you arrived. 15 minutes earlier, a young funeral home employee had called my office. The young attendant hesitated on the phone, fear pressing through the line. "Dr. Cross, I think the body is bleeding." People new to death are easily frightened. A shadow can become a bruise. A dried trace of fluid can be mistaken for fresh blood. Fear completes the rest of the story for them. Still, I came. When I entered, Victor Langford's body was already lying on a metal stretcher a few meters from the cremation chamber. Heat made the air in front of it ripple faintly. The furnace engine gave off a low, even growl like a giant animal breathing inside the wall. I pulled the white sheet down. Victor's face had been made peaceful with cosmetics and money. Black suit, black tie, hair combed neatly back. Everything had been arranged so that he could leave the world looking like a respectable chairman. Then I saw what the young employee had seen. At the corner of Victor's left eye was a very thin red line. It was almost hidden beneath the funeral makeup. It was not a large cut or an obvious impact mark, only a dried line so fine, it looked as though something sharp had brushed across the skin before someone tried to make it disappear. If the furnace door closed, that line would vanish in seconds. I lifted his right hand. Rigor mortis had left the fingers slightly curled. The tips of the index and middle fingers showed faint abrasion. The skin was not deeply torn. It had merely been scraped, as if before death he had tried to claw at a rough surface. Under the thumbnail, I found something else. Dust. Not household dust. Not coffin fabric dust. It was an extremely fine gray powder with a faint metallic sheen when I angled the sample stick beneath the light. I placed it into a test tube. On the label, I wrote only 4 words: gray dust, fingernail. I do not write guesses on evidence. I never write guesses on evidence. When I gently opened the jaw for a preliminary check, I smelled hospital antiseptic and the funeral home's chemicals. Beneath both odors, however, there was something much fainter. It was so weak that if the room had been noisier, if I had been in a hurry, if the furnace had heated for only a few more minutes, I might have missed it. Burned plastic, singed synthetic fiber. I looked again at the death certificate. Acute myocardial infarction. It could be true. It could also be only half the truth. In my profession, half-truths are sometimes more dangerous than lies, because they carry enough of truth's shape to lull everyone else to sleep. Adrian stopped at the foot of the stretcher. "Dr. Cross, A man's voice cut across the sound of the furnace. Adrian Langford entered the room. Victor's only son wore a black suit and a steel watch. His eyes were shadowed, but his posture was too steady for someone who had just lost his father. He looked at my gloves first, then at the body. That was the first thing I registered. Not how much grief showed in his eyes, but the fact that he checked my hands before he looked at his father. His gaze moved from my gloves to the body. Is there a problem? I need to stop the cremation. The room seemed to cool, even with heat still pouring from the furnace behind me. A woman in black appeared behind him. Marianne Langford, Victor's wife. Her silence carried more calculation than grief. Her lace-gloved hand tightened around a handkerchief. The handkerchief was too white, too clean, like a prop carefully chosen for a funeral. Adrian stepped half a pace forward. Adrian's hand closed around the edge of his sleeve. My father had heart disease. The hospital signed the certificate. The family agreed. What else do you want? I want to know why there is metallic dust under his fingernails. He paused for the briefest moment. It was too short to call fear, but long enough for me to remember. His eyes flicked toward the coffin. It could be from the funeral home staff. It could. It could be from the coffin. It could. So you are delaying this because of a could be. I looked at Victor Langford. The dead are always silent, but silence does not mean they agree with the story the living write for them. Sometimes a body needs to keep only a trace of blood, a grain of dust, or a tiny scratch on a fingertip to make a room full of living people begin to fear. I looked back at the body. I am delaying this because too many could-bes are appearing in the wrong places at the same time. Adrian looked at me. His jaw tightened. Adrian lowered his voice. Sign the papers, Dr. Cross. The mourners are waiting. Precisely because they are waiting, we should not rush. I turned toward the funeral home employee. Shut down the furnace. Transfer the body to the forensic center. Call Inspector Marcus Hale of Homicide. The young employee ran to the control panel. The furnace's growl slowly softened. Adrian Langford did not shout. He did not threaten me either. He only stood still and watched the stretcher roll past him. In that moment, I did not know whether he was a son trying to preserve dignity before a crowd, a man concealing a family secret, or simply someone too used to having things go his way. I knew only one thing. As the stretcher passed, Marianne Langford stepped back half a pace, not because she was afraid of the body, but because she was afraid the stretcher was not going into the furnace. Outside, rain veiled Ravenshaw in a thin grey curtain. The test tube in my coat pocket was cold. I called Marcus Hale. He answered after 2 rings, his voice thick with sleeplessness. Rain crackled faintly through Hale's line. What is it this time, Cross? An administrative death? I just pulled a body out of the mouth of a cremation furnace. The other end went silent. I hate it when you start a call like that. The Langford family arrived at the forensic center with a lawyer. The man wore an expensive grey suit and had already chosen anger before he reached us. He blocked the corridor before the stretcher could be wheeled into autopsy room 2. My clients refuse any form of invasive examination. The hospital issued a legal death certificate. Holding the body without the family's consent is an abuse of authority. I kept my gloves raised where the lawyer could see them. You are right about one thing. I cannot autopsy a medical death simply because I'm curious. The lawyer's eyes sharpened. I let the word police stay outside the room for one more second, but I can suspend a cremation and seal a body when I discover signs that may relate to external intervention. The rest belongs to the police, and the police are here. Marcus Hale approached from the end of the corridor. His leather coat still carried the smell of rain. He took a warrant bearing a red seal from his pocket and raised it in front of the lawyer. Hale lifted the warrant between 2 fingers. Forensic examination order from homicide. From this moment on, Victor Langford's body is evidence in a criminal investigation. The family has no right to interfere and no right to refuse. Move aside. Adrian looked at the warrant. His face did not change. Marianne looked at it longer than necessary. The lawyer was about to speak again, but Adrian lifted a hand to stop him. "Let them do it." His voice was very low, so calm that the sentence sounded less like confidence than prediction. Adrian's mouth barely moved. "I trust the result will not change." I pushed the stretcher behind the steel door. The examination room was kept at a steady cold. Noah Bell, my newly graduated forensic assistant, was already standing beside the steel table. He tried to look calm, but his fingers kept tapping lightly against the instrument tray. "Begin." We proceeded in order. Victor Langford's heart was indeed unhealthy. The myocardial wall was thick. The coronary arteries showed atherosclerosis. There were multiple signs of old damage. It was not absurd for a hospital doctor to look at that medical history and conclude that his heart had killed him. Noah's finger stopped on the noteboard, so the hospital was not entirely wrong. Not entirely wrong is where many murders like to hide. He looked up. I did not explain further. The thing that interested me was not in the heart, it was in the airway. From deeper lung samples, we found the same gray-silver powder as the one beneath Victor's fingernails. There was not much of it, not enough for an untrained person to see immediately, but enough to damage the story that he had simply sat down, suffered a heart attack, and died quietly. The test tube caught the light. Dust in the lungs and dust under the fingernails. Record it first. Noah kept his eyes on the test tube. "You do not think that is strange?" "I think it is strange, but strange is not a conclusion." He was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "If he was already dead before the dust appeared, it should not be there." I stopped writing. That was why I liked new people. They were not confident enough to turn a hypothesis into a conclusion, but sometimes their hesitation touched exactly the right place. I slid him a clean sheet of scratch paper. "Write that on scratch paper. Do not put it in the official report yet." His brow tightened. "Why?" I capped the pen before answering. "Because if we write it too early, we will start looking for evidence to defend it. I want the evidence to pull us forward, not the other way around." We continued the examination. In Victor's mouth were tiny scratches, not large enough for a funeral home worker to notice under yellow lighting, but regular enough to suggest he had bitten something hard before death. I requested an additional X-ray. On the screen, a small metallic point appeared like a dot trapped in the body's darkness. It was not a fragment of tooth. It was not an old surgical pin. It was not jewelry. Noah leaned toward the screen. He swallowed that? Whether voluntarily or under force, we do not know yet. But if it is evidence, then the dead man turned his own body into the final safe. I stopped there. There are moments when a body ceases to be a passive victim and becomes the last stage of a desperate will. Victor Langford had not merely died in a locked room. Before he died, he had tried to preserve something that the cleaner of the scene could not wipe away with a cloth, suck into a purifier, or toss into a trash bin without reopening the entire body like a file sealed under the wrong label. I added to the record. Small metallic object, suspected relation to storage device, extraction and separate analysis required. Under the right fingernails, there were also a few dark fabric fibers and a very thin brown residue. Not enough to name, but enough to make me think Victor had tried to draw or carve a symbol somewhere with whatever clarity remained to him. People about to die do not write poetry. They write the shortest thing fear allows. The preliminary report contained a single conclusion: insufficient basis to confirm natural death. In the corridor, Hale took it from my hand. He read the preliminary report twice. "You just overturned an entire hospital's conclusion with a pinch of dust." "No." Hale's thumb paused on the edge of the report. "Then with what?" I looked through the frosted glass of the examination room, with the fact that the dust appeared where it should not have appeared. Hale slipped the report into his coat pocket. "That is not an answer." "Good, then you still have work to do." His hand stayed on the pocket. "The scene? 18th floor. Victor's private office." Hale sighed. "Can you not just say he was murdered?" I looked back through the frosted glass. I could, but the dead have not given enough. The 18th floor of Eastbridge Holdings was designed to impress. Victor Langford's private office was nearly 70 square meters. Dark wood, expensive wool carpet, reinforced glass overlooking Ravenshaw. The smell of cold coffee still lingered in the air. A cylindrical air purifier stood in the corner, emitting a soft, steady hum. A green indicator glowed on its body beneath the word safe. Hale dropped a thin folder onto the desk. Mechanical lock combined with an electronic code. Internal bolt. Windows sealed shut. Hallway cameras show Langford entering the office at 8 in the evening. From then until morning, no one went in or out. His assistant and security broke the door at 7. A perfect locked room. I put on shoe covers and moved slowly along the edge of the carpet. Everything in the room had been arranged to tell the same story. A wealthy man with long-term heart disease, overworked, collapsing in his private office. A death reasonable enough that no one wanted to ask additional questions. An opened bottle of heart medication sat on the desk. One pill lay beside a half-empty glass of water. The leather chair had been pushed back. No signs of struggle, no obvious blood, no broken objects. Lucas Grant, Hale's crime scene technician, moved along the carpet with his light. He swept the beam beneath the desk. Too clean. No strange shoe marks, no foreign fibers. If someone killed him, that person must be a ghost. Ghosts do not usually leave dust under fingernails. Lucas gave a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. I stood before Victor's desk. The desktop was too neat. Pens placed parallel to the notebook's edge. Files stacked in straight lines. The dead can be orderly. So can the person who cleaned after them. I looked at the air purifier and at the word safe, still glowing on its body, like an answer given too early. I pointed at the green indicator. Has this machine been running since your people came in? Lucas glanced at the indicator. Looks that way. Security told us it was already running when they broke in. I moved closer to the purifier. Does the system record air quality? Lucas did not stop working. It has internal memory, but I am not sure how detailed. Remove the filter. Hale looked at me. You think the purifier knows who the killer is? I think it knows what this room breathed. Lucas removed the cover. A few minutes later, he pulled out the white HEPA filter. Under the forensic light, a faint patch of grey dust appeared near the inner edge. Not much, but it carried the same silver tint. Lucas did not say bingo like he usually did. He only looked at me. Hale folded his arms. Hale did not look convinced. There is dust in the purifier. But the dust could have already been in the room. It could. Hale tapped one gloved finger against the desk. The door was locked. The windows were locked. No one entered. If the dust was not already here, how did it get in? I did not answer immediately. On the desk was heart medication. Under the fingernails, dust. In the lungs, dust. In the purifier, dust. On the carpet, the chair pushed back. None of those things formed an answer yet. They only formed a repeating question. What entered the room without opening the door? I turned off the overhead lights. Lucas understood and lowered his light until it grazed the carpet. Beneath the desk, a few carpet fibers had been torn, very small. The cleaner had missed them because they had only looked from above. From there, a faint grey dust trail ran almost invisibly toward the giant bookcase that covered the entire west wall. The trail was not straight. It broke and resumed, like something had been dragged, stopped, and then shoved back into place. Lucas stopped the light at the base of the bookcase. Slide marks. Hale crouched. Hale braced one hand against the bookcase. This bookcase weighs hundreds of pounds. Then whoever moved it was either very strong or knew how to use leverage. Hale and Lucas shoved the wooden mass together. The friction made a low, dull groan. Behind the bookcase was not continuous concrete wall, but a false wood panel. A small decal covering a screw had come loose. The screw head showed fresh, metallic scratches. No one spoke for several seconds until Lucas removed the screws and the panel popped free. A draft of cold, damp air struck our faces. Behind it was an auxiliary ventilation duct made of galvanized sheet metal. The rough internal mesh had been cut at one corner. Grey-silver dust clung to the metal edge. Hale looked into the darkness behind the panel, a locked room. I looked at the dust along the duct. No. We only locked the wrong thing. The other end of the duct led to storage room 3, an old room unused for 2 years since Eastbridge moved its records to the cloud. The corridor leading there was darker than the rest of the building. The carpet was older, the ceiling lights flickered faintly, and the camera in the corner was off. Lucas checked the system. Reported broken 2 days ago. Not fixed. Hale smiled without warmth. A camera breaks exactly 2 days before a murder. This city is sometimes too polite to killers. The storage room door was secured with an old physical lock and showed no signs of forced entry. Lucas opened it with professional tools. The wooden door creaked when it moved. The smell of decayed paper and old dust rushed out. Unlike Victor's absurdly clean office, this room was covered in a thick layer of dust. On the wall adjoining the chairman's office, the ventilation grill had been removed and left crooked on the floor. There was much more grey dust at the mouth of the duct, beside a torn roll of heat-resistant industrial tape. Hale crouched. Drag marks. 2 faint parallel lines ran through the dust, like the wheels of a suitcase or equipment case. Lucas lowered his light to the floor, footwear impression. Only the toe and half the heel remain. The rest was wiped. About size 43. Fairly heavy person. I looked at the lock without forced entry marks. This person had a key, or was given one. Hale turned toward Lucas. List of people with keys to storage room 3. Lucas checked his phone. Head of security, administrative manager, and Ethan Reed, Victor's assistant. The person who found the body the next morning. Hale turned to me. I know what you are thinking. I have not spoken. You think everything points to Reed. No forced door, broken camera, storage room requires a key. Reed knew Victor's schedule. Reed found the body. Reed could control internal records. Hale did not look away from the dust trail, and that is exactly why I do not like it. I looked at him. You think it is too obvious? I think anyone capable of staging a fake locked room would not leave a straight road to the trusted assistant unless they wanted us to walk that road. I did not answer. On the wall of the storage room hung an old notice board, pinned with yellowed papers from years before. One of them was an air conditioning maintenance schedule. I stepped closer. On the line reading auxiliary duct, 18th floor, someone had circled it in blue ink. The ink was not new, but it was not too old either. I photographed it. Hale looked over my shoulder. Another person knew about the duct, or someone studied it in advance. Hale studied the dust trail, the lock, and the dead camera before the pattern settled into words. So tonight we have 3 questions. Who had the key? Who knew the ventilation duct existed? And who was calm enough to turn heart disease into a weapon? I looked into the darkness of the duct opening. 4 questions. Hale's face turned slightly toward me. The 4th? Why did Victor claw at the carpet instead of calling for help? Hale fell silent. That was what I still did not understand. A man in a locked room, deprived of air, panicking, with a phone on the desk, and an internal call button beneath the edge of the desk. So, why were his fingertips worn against the carpet? What had Victor Langford been reaching for? Or, what had he tried to leave beneath the desk before he died? 3 people lied in 3 different ways, and if anyone had been standing outside the two-way glass at that moment, they might have reached their own conclusion before we did. Adrian was too calm, so he's suspicious. Marianne was too panicked, so she was suspicious. Ethan Reed was afraid in the way of a man who had either committed a crime or just realized he had been pushed into the role of one. Adrian Langford was first. He entered the interview room with near-perfect composure. Before Hale even opened his folder, he placed a thick medical file on the table, neatly arranged in a plastic sleeve. My father's medical records from the past 5 years. Domestic hospitals and Singapore. Valve disease. Atherosclerosis. Doctors warned him he could die at any time if he overworked himself. Hale flipped through several pages. Very well prepared. I am only doing what a son should do. I stood behind the two-way glass and looked at the file, too smooth to be comfortable. A man who had just learned his father was dead. running between hospital, funeral home, and police station, could still prepare a perfect medical dossier like a tender document. Perhaps he was the kind of person who controlled everything with paperwork. Perhaps he was building an exit route. Adrian folded his hands on the table. My father did not want to be cut open. He told us that many times. Dr. Cross is insulting his final wish. Hale looked up from the file. When did he tell you that? Many times. Hale tapped his pen once. Most recently. Adrian paused for half a second. Last week. The pen stopped moving. Where? Adrian adjusted one cuff. At home. Hale let the pause lengthen. Did anyone hear it? No. Hale nodded and wrote a line. Behind the glass, I watched Adrian's hands. He did not tap the table. He did not clench his fists. He did not touch his cuffs. He knew that his body was also part of his testimony. The second person was Marianne Langford. She wore a black silk dress and held a lace handkerchief against her lap. Tears fell, but her makeup did not blur. Marianne dabbed carefully at the corner of one eye. He worked too much. I told him to rest. When he was alive, he feared cold and pain. I only wanted him to rest as soon as possible. Hale placed a call record on the table. The funeral home confirms that you scheduled the cremation at 6:30 in the morning, but the hospital signed the death certificate at 7:15. How do you explain arranging a cremation before a doctor officially declared your husband dead? Marianne froze. The handkerchief stopped in midair. For several seconds, she was no longer Victor Langford's elegant widow. She was simply a person who had realized that her black dress was not enough to hide a timing error. I was only following Adrian's instruction. Hale tilted his head. Adrian told you to call the funeral home? No, I mean, our family all knew Victor wanted to be cremated quickly. Hale turned back one page in his notes. A moment ago, you were the one who wanted him to rest as soon as possible. Marianne lowered her eyes to the handkerchief. I do not remember clearly. I was very confused that morning. She was lying, but her lie was crude, rushed, frightened. It was a curtain yanked up in panic, not the hand that had prepared the duct, the camera, the dust, and the clean scene. The third person was Ethan Reed. Victor's trusted assistant entered the interview room with sweat on his forehead, despite the cold air conditioning. His hands stayed locked together. His thumb kept rubbing over the back of his other hand, scraping the same patch of skin as if he could erase a mistake from there. Hale began gently enough. What time did you leave the company last night? Around 6. Mr. Langford wanted to work alone, so I went home. You did not come back? No. Hale turned his laptop toward him. On the screen, traffic camera footage showed the turn into Eastbridge's underground parking level. Time: 21:40. Ethan Reed's license plate sat clear in the frame. For a second, Reed looked less like a suspect than a man watching the floor vanish beneath him. Hale tilted the laptop a little closer. Do you practice bilocation? I forgot a file, so I came back to get it. What file? The internal ledger. Where was it? Reed swallowed. Storage room 3. Behind the glass. Noah stood beside me, breathing very quietly. His question came out almost without sound. Is it him? I do not know. But he lied. Innocent people lie too when they are hiding another crime. Noah went quiet after that. Inside the room, Hale let the silence press on Reed before moving to the key. Do you have access to storage room 3? Yes. And the auxiliary duct connected to the chairman's office? I did not know about it. Hale slid a photograph of the maintenance board across the table. The circled line was impossible to miss. The duct is marked here. I never noticed it. You returned there close to 10 at night for a ledger and did not notice a sheet of paper circled on the wall? I just took the file and left. Did anyone see you? Reed lowered his head. No. Did you meet Victor Langford? No, this time, he answered too quickly. 3 people entered the interview room carrying 3 lies and 3 different forms of fear. Adrian lied through preparation. Marianne lied through tears. Ethan Reed lied through panic. What mattered was not whose fear looked most convincing. It was who had been placed where the killer wanted us to look. When Reed was led out, he stumbled once against the edge of the chair. A frightened man losing balance would have grabbed the table. Reed did not. His cuff brushed the underside of the tabletop with a small, deliberate movement, so quick that Hale kept walking without noticing it. Noah noticed only after the door closed. He pointed through the glass, unsure whether he had seen a gesture or only fear trying to leave the body. Did he drop something? Lucas entered the interview room with gloves and checked the underside of the table. Taped beneath the wooden lip was a strip torn from a file label, folded twice until it was almost flat. 4 words had been pressed into it with a pencil so hard that the paper had nearly split. Under the desk, Hale looked at the paper, then at the camera in the corner. He could not say it aloud, no, so he left us a place to look. We returned to Victor's office after dark. Eastbridge, after working hours, resembled an enormous body drained of blood. Long corridors, white lights, thick carpet swallowing footsteps. The air purifier was still running in the corner. On its body, the word safe glowed green, calm as a mockery. I went straight under the desk. Near the internal call button, a narrow gap split the decorative wood. Lucas worked a pair of tweezers into it and pulled free a piece of black plastic, the outer shell of a micro SD card. The plastic edge was deformed. The core was missing. Hale stared at the evidence bag. Victor did not hide the memory card here, no. He only hid the shell. Where is the core? I remembered the tiny metallic point on the X-ray. Inside him. For a moment, even Lucas stopped moving. The clue under the desk told us what Victor wanted found. The clue inside the body told us how badly he feared the room would be cleaned before anyone believed him. Lucas lowered the light again. Beneath the desk, the torn carpet fibers were not random. Scratches curved across the wood near the chair leg, crooked and trembling, like a half-burned match carved in the dark. Hale did not look away from the carved mark. He knew their name, or he knew how they wanted to be recognized. When we left Eastbridge, the rain had stopped. Hale's phone vibrated. Lucas had sent a frame from the hallway camera. A janitor with a cleaning cart at 21:05, bending to tie his shoe while the fluorescent light flickered twice. 11 minutes later, the same corridor, the same janitor, the same movement, the same double flicker. Hale studied the frame. A person can tie his shoe twice, but a light does not repeat itself for our convenience. Lucas called while we were still outside the building. No missing frames, no image jump. It was looped. Someone inserted an old slice of time over the segment they needed to hide. Hale looked at the frozen janitor. Could Reed do that? Lucas stayed on the line. He has the internal system password. But this technique does not look like an office assistant's work. At least 2 people then. One to enter the storage room. One to blind the camera. Or something worse. A group practiced enough that each person needed only one part. The dust analysis arrived at 3 in the morning. Noah placed the pages on my desk, his eyes red from lack of sleep. The dust in Langford's lungs, under his fingernails, in the purifier, and in the ventilation duct all match. Composition? Silica, aluminum, heat-resistant adhesive, and insulating fiberglass microfibers. I had seen that ratio once before, in an old accident file. I opened the police department's record system and typed, Eastbridge Bridge. 3 years earlier, an approach span of Eastbridge Bridge had collapsed during a rainy night, killing 17 people. The conclusion then, construction accident, weak foundation, prolonged rain, structural failure. I opened the material analysis report from that scene. 2 composition tables appeared side by side, one from the broken bridge, one from Victor Langford's lungs. They matched down to the numbers. Noah stood behind me, his voice quieter. The thing that killed him came from the bridge? No. Then what? From a secret buried with the bridge. In the conference room, Hale projected an image of the broken bridge onto the screen. 17 dead. Most were night shift workers and a few passers-by. The subcontractor that supplied the materials had been Hung Fat Materials, a subsidiary of Eastbridge Holdings. The legal representative on paper, Victor Langford. But the signature on the material acceptance record was not Victor's. Hale zoomed in. Beneath the subcontractor representative line was a hard, decisive signature: Adrian Langford. 3 years earlier, Adrian had just been brought into the company as director of materials to improve his resume. He was the one who signed off on the substandard batch. If Victor had been preparing to deliver the real file to investigators, the person going to prison would not be only Victor. Adrian had motive. But motive does not open a storage room lock. Motive does not loop a camera. Motive does not pump dust through a duct. The following afternoon, Lucas recovered part of the data from the memory card core extracted during the examination. It was not much, only a short audio clip, distorted and full of static. Victor's voice was old but clear. Victor's voice broke through the static. "I will hand over the file. 17 people died because of us." Adrian's recorded answer came colder. "Not because of us, because you are weak." Then came the sound of a chair being pulled hard. Victor sounded closer to the microphone now. "I signed wrong. You signed wrong. But there is still time." Adrian's recorded voice flattened into ice. "There has been no time since you called them." The audio dissolved into static. Then one final sentence surfaced beneath the purifier's hum. "Once they have been paid, no one can stop them." Hale listened to it 3 times. "Who are they?" No one answered. The conference room phone rang. Lucas picked it up, listened for several seconds, then looked at Hale. "Ethan Reed has disappeared. 2103. A gloved hand placed a disposable phone on a table. On the screen was a drafted text. "Chief Hale, I want to change my statement about the file. 9 tonight. Vandal Heights apartment parking garage. Come alone. If I see police cars, the thing you need will be burned." The person read it again. "Deleted the words, please." Pressed send. The message reached Hale's phone at 8:15 that evening. Hale read it, then loaded his gun. "Cross, go home and rest. Tonight is our work." I looked at the message. The words were rushed, panicked. Very much like a man realizing he was about to be turned into a scapegoat. But the holder of a lethal secret is rarely allowed to tell his own story. "I will not ride in your car." Hale's hand stopped near the holster. "What are you going to do?" "I will take the forensic center vehicle." Hale folded his arms. "For what?" "To collect a witness." Hale looked at me. I finished the sentence for him. "Or to collect a body." At 9:15, the Vandal Heights parking garage was empty, and Reed did not appear. Half an hour later, Hale's radio crackled. The building manager reported an abnormal situation in a 12th floor apartment. Registered tenant, Ethan Reed. When we arrived, the corridor had already been sealed. The apartment was silent. No signs of crude forced entry. Reed had been found dead. For 1 second, the file stopped being a file. I remembered the cuff brushing the underside of the interview table. The strip of label folded flat. The 4 words pressed so hard they nearly split the paper. Reed had been afraid, but he had still tried to help us. Now even that small courage had been taken from him. The scene had been arranged to tell a very convenient story. A panicked assistant, implicated in falsified records, crushed by investigation, preparing to flee, then collapsing before he could testify. No suicide note needed, no confession required. On the desk lay an open laptop, an unlocked suitcase, a passport, cash, and several legal search pages still glowing in the browser. Everything was enough for a busy person to believe Reed was guilty, and too perfectly placed for me not to feel cold. The truly panicked leave disorder without pattern. They forget important things, take meaningless ones, and create excess traces without knowing they have done it. Here, the mess had been placed exactly where it needed to be, like a stage after the lights had gone out, but the props were still deliberately within the audience's view. Lucas checked the laptop. Lucas angled the light lower. Browser history created within the past 2 hours. Multiple searches about criminal liability, leaving the country, and the Eastbridge Bridge case. Hale stood by the door, his face heavy. Superiors will like this script. A greedy assistant kills his boss, gets crushed by guilt and the threat of prosecution, then dies before arrest. Clean file, quiet press. Eastbridge survives. I performed a preliminary scene check and recorded only what was necessary. There were signs Reed had not actively created this entire scene. The placement of objects, the access times, and one restrained mark suggested he had been controlled before death. Reed's death was already clear in the way staged deaths are often clear. It did not announce, "I am dead." It instructed us, "Believe this story." Noah found a tiny black fiber and a familiar amount of grey dust under Reed's fingernails. Hale looked at the glowing laptop. Someone he knew? Possibly. No forced entry. He opened the door for someone, or someone had the right to enter. Adrian? I sealed the fiber bag before answering. Adrian has motive. But the person who created the browser history, staged the scene, covered the cameras, handled Reed, and left very little trace. I am not sure he did it alone. My phone vibrated. "Unknown number," I answered. There was no voice on the other end, only a dry sound stretched across a moment, like someone striking a match beside my ear. A brief flare of fire, then the call ended. I looked at the dark screen. What was that? I put the phone into my pocket. A greeting. From whom? I looked at the black fiber in the evidence bag. From someone who did not want Reed to talk. At 3 in the morning, the forensic technology room was lit only by the blue glow of monitors. Lucas had been sitting in front of Eastbridge's camera system for hours. He was no longer asking whether the hallway footage had been looped. That much had already been established outside Eastbridge. Now he was searching for the part the loop had failed to bury. Lucas rubbed both eyes, then replayed the clip. The replacement is clean enough to pass a first sweep. No missing frames, no splice marks, no obvious jump. But clean is not the same as perfect. He placed the two clips side by side again. The janitor, the cart, the shoe, the double flicker. The movement matched because it had been borrowed. What mattered now was everything the borrowed time could not fully cover. Hale folded his arms. Reed does not have this skill. No, Adrian. He has money to hire someone. I looked at the lower edge of the screen. In both clips, the cleaning cart had a black trash bag hanging from its side. When the janitor bent down, the bag brushed the wheel in the same crease, the same small fold of plastic. That sameness no longer surprised us. The reflection on the floor behind the cart did. Very faint. Only a longer than normal streak, as though someone had stood at the edge of the frame and had not been completely swallowed by the loop. Lucas leaned close to the screen. Someone was there. Hale bent down. Covered by the looped video layer? Not completely. The reflection slipped outside the covered area. Lucas filtered the image. The shadow became slightly clearer. A tall figure, broad shoulders. The right hand held a box-shaped object. Not enough for identification. Enough to know that during the missing 11 minutes, the corridor had not been empty. I looked at that shadow. Not Adrian. Adrian was tall but thinner. Ethan Reed was shorter. This person looked like security or a technician. Do we have a list of maintenance contractors this week? Lucas nodded and opened the data. 3 companies, 2 cleaning teams, 1 air filtration inspection unit. The name of the final company made Lucas's hand stop. Ashfall Services. No one spoke. The name had not appeared in Adrian's, Marianne's, or Reed's statements. It had not appeared in any official conclusion. Yet there it was in the building access schedule 2 days before the murder, under a reason so harmless no one had bothered to remember it. Air quality inspection, 18th floor. I looked at the word safe in the photograph of the purifier. Perhaps the machine had not lied. Perhaps the room had truly been safe. It had only been safe for the person walking out, not the person dying inside. The next morning, the briefing room felt heavy as stone. The deputy commissioner slammed the report onto the table. The digital traces in Ethan Reed's laptop are clear. Browser history, financial documents, escape plans, motive, opportunity. Why has homicide not filed a closing report? Hale leaned back in his chair, face unchanged. Because Reed died in a scene staged for us to like, the deputy commissioner's attention cut toward me. Dr. Cross? I pushed the preliminary conclusion into the center of the table. There are signs Reed was controlled before death. The scene traces do not fit the story that he created the whole situation himself. Under the victim's fingernails were a black fiber and grey dust matching evidence from the Langford case. The Deputy Commissioner's attention stayed on the report. Are you certain? Forensics does not work under public pressure. We work with evidence, and the evidence does not allow me to rewrite the report into a convenient story. Hale turned the laptop toward the Deputy Commissioner. This is the 11-minute looped camera segment. This is the reflection of the person hidden by it. This is the schedule showing Ashfall Services entering the building for an air filtration inspection 2 days before the murder. The Deputy Commissioner stared at the screen for a long time. You have 48 hours. I returned to my office. The familiar smell of disinfectant steadied my mind. The case had changed shape. At first, it looked like a death the family was rushing into the fire. Then it became a locked room murder. Now it resembled a much longer shadow, stretching from Victor Langford's office to old files, collapsed bridges, vanished witnesses, and deaths once called accidents. Victor Langford was the first link cut. Ethan Reed was the second. Adrian Langford had clear motive, but there was someone behind him. I left the department close to 4 in the morning. My apartment was on the 11th floor of an old building, where the corridor always smelled of cheap floor cleaner and aging wiring inside the walls. I had lived there for 8 years. I knew the sound of the elevator when it stopped at my floor. I knew the neighbor's door closing at midnight. I even knew the small sound of the air purifier beside my bookshelf whenever it changed modes. That night, when I opened my door, the light on the machine was blinking green. Beneath it were the words "safe." I remembered very clearly turning it off before I left. The difference between a room that has been searched and a room that has been touched is very small. A searched room wants you to know it was violated. A touched room wants you to doubt your own memory. I stood in the doorway for almost a minute before putting on the gloves from my coat pocket. The purifier cover opened with a very soft click. Inside the filter there was no paper, no message, no cheap threatening symbol, only a black hair tied neatly with a thin thread, placed beside a pinch of silver ash so translucent it almost seemed weightless. It took me several seconds to realize the hair was mine. That was what made the night cleaners different from ordinary killers. They did not only threaten life, they invaded a person's sense of privacy, then left evidence just small enough that no one but the victim could fully understand it. A gun makes you fear death. A knife makes you fear pain. But a strand of your own hair lying inside the air purifier in your home makes you fear every safe space you once believed was real. The phone on the dining table vibrated. "Unknown number," I answered. There was no human voice on the other end, only the steady hum of a running air purifier. Soft, clean, calm to the point of sickness. Then came a very faint cough. I did not know whether it belonged to a living person, or was the final sound cut from the night Victor Langford died. The call ended. I did not sound the alarm immediately. I photographed the small scene inside my own home, packed the hair and silver ash into a clean bag, noted the time, and called Hale. He arrived 18 minutes later, his coat turned partly inside out from haste. Lucas came with him, his face pale when he looked into the filter. How did they get into your home? That is not the question they want me to ask. Then what is? I looked at the word safe still glowing on the machine. They want me to ask myself, is there anywhere they have not already entered? Hale was silent for a long time. Then, he placed a stack of documents on the table. Our superiors approved the financial audit of the Langford family. There is a weakest link. Who? The top page carried one name: Marianne Langford. 20 minutes later, in the interview room, Hale placed a copy of a birth certificate in front of Marianne. A 7-year-old boy lived in a nearby city with his biological mother. The father's name field was blank, but Victor Langford's personal account transferred money to the mother and child every month. A secret trust had been activated not long before Victor died. Marianne went rigid. The lace handkerchief in her hand tightened slightly. soft enough to look almost innocent. Hale tapped the birth certificate with 2 fingers. You rushed the cremation not because you loved your husband. You wanted to burn everything before the scandal of the illegitimate child came out. If the examination was delayed, the police would investigate Victor's finances. And we did. Marianne looked at the birth certificate. Tears gathered very quickly. For some people, tears are a reflex. For others, they are a social skill developed over years of charity dinners and family funerals. Marianne drew the handkerchief closer to her mouth. I only wanted to protect the family. Which family? She looked up. Her gaze passed over me too quickly, but I saw what lay beneath the panic. Calculation. Not deep, not blatant. Just enough to turn the handkerchief in her hand into a prop. Hale slid Reed's photograph across the table. Reed is dead. The next person silenced could be you if you are still holding something. Marianne trembled. This time the trembling looked very real. Skilled manipulators are not people who never fear. They are people who know how to use their real fear to make others believe the rest of their lies. Marianne's voice dropped until the microphone barely caught it. Victor was afraid of Adrian. He told me Adrian was no longer the boy he had raised. That Adrian had begun dealing with a group of people who handled problems for the rich. Not lawyers, not security, something else. Hale leaned forward. Name? Marianne swallowed. Victor called them the night cleaners. The night cleaners. The name sounded almost childish, like a story told to frighten children who refused to sleep. But the more I heard it, the colder I felt. Because names that sound naive are sometimes chosen to cover things adults do not dare call by their true names. Do you have evidence? Marianne opened her handbag and took out a small USB drive wrapped in tissue. Victor gave this to me 2 days before he died. He told me that if anything happened to him, I should give it to the police. I did not dare. I only wanted to cremate him quickly and close everything. Hale took the USB. You nearly buried the truth with your husband. Marianne broke down. This time, her tears blurred her mascara. I know. When she cried, the room's white light was merciless. No darkness, no background music, no knife hidden beneath the table. Only a woman in mourning clothes, a lace handkerchief, a voice breaking at the right moment, and 2 officers seeing exactly what she wanted us to see. A weak widow pulled into the sins of her husband's family. The USB contained a copy of the Eastbridge Bridge report, transfer records to Ethan Reed, and multiple payments through shell companies. Among them, one name appeared 3 times. Ashfall Services. Lucas cross-checked the financial data. The company had appeared in 3 old cases: a warehouse fire, an elevator accident, and a drowning ruled accidental. All 3 victims had been preparing to testify in court or hand documents to investigators. None of the cases had enough evidence to reopen. None had a clear weapon. None looked like a crime at first. I looked at the list on the screen and suddenly understood why the most frightening thing in this case was not the silver dust, the duct, or Reed's death. It was the feeling that all of it could have happened many times before, without us ever realizing it. The night cleaners did not resemble a gang. They resembled a procedure, an invisible mechanism that appeared whenever the wealthy needed a truth to vanish without making noise. They did not need knives or guns unless forced to use them, because those things were too loud, too crude, too much like crime. They used existing illness, existing accidents, existing fear. They merely pushed lightly on something already cracked and let the world call it fate. A heart attack, an accident, a disappearance, a body pushed into the furnace before anyone had time to ask a question. The arrest warrant for Adrian Langford was signed before midnight. But when Hale's team reached the Langford mansion, Adrian was gone. Half his wardrobe was empty, the safe was open, his passport had disappeared. On his desk lay a white envelope. Inside was a small note. Note: to Dr. Evelyn Cross and Inspector Marcus Hale. You found the dust. Good. But dust is only what remains after a room has been cleaned. Ask yourselves this: who is really holding the broom? There was no signature, only the black printed symbol of a half-burned match in the corner. Hale crushed the note in his hand. He ran. I looked at the match symbol. No. Hale turned sharply. What do you mean? Adrian is running, but the person who wrote this is not. At 6 the next morning, police found Adrian Langford's car at the edge of Ravenshaw's eastern port. The door was open. His passport remained in the glove compartment. His phone had been snapped in half on the driver's seat, and a little silver ash lay scattered across the black leather. No clear signs of struggle. No body. Adrian Langford vanished from the city, like a name erased from a file. The press called him a fleeing suspect. Our superiors called it an ongoing line of investigation. Hale called it something else. Hale did not look at me. Cleaning. I did not answer, because I knew he was right, but not right enough. A good cleanup does not only erase the person who must be erased, it also leaves behind the exact person who must be suspected. Adrian Langford's body was never found. From that morning onward, he existed only as a legal status, a wanted photograph, and a question the night cleaners had made sure no one could answer cleanly. In the recovered data from the memory card core, Lucas found a hidden folder that had not yet been fully decrypted. Its name contained only 3 characters, M_L. Inside were 2 contracts encrypted through the same shell payment system used by Ashfall's services. The first had been created 7 days before Victor died. The client was Victor Langford. Its content did not say murder. The night cleaners never wrote in such crude language. They wrote, "Create an acute medical incident in the office. Preserve the possibility of assigning responsibility to Adrian Langford. And ensure the Eastbridge Bridge file is found after the target loses the ability to resist." Noah read the line a 3rd time. Victor hired them himself? He was not innocent. In the conference room, the air was so cold that the projector's hum sounded like insects trapped inside the wall. Victor Langford knew he was already dying from heart disease. He also knew the Eastbridge Bridge case would return if someone delivered the real file. But instead of confessing, he chose to stage a perfect murder against himself and place all blame on Adrian, the rebellious son, the man who signed the material acceptance, the heir with a motive to kill his father. If the plan succeeded, Victor would die as a belated victim of conscience. Adrian would be dragged into the mud. The Langford name would be washed clean with media tears. Hale looked at the screen. So the night cleaners betrayed the deal. Not exactly. Lucas opened the second contract. It had been created 3 days before Victor's death, later than the first contract, but with a deposit 4 times larger. The payer was not Adrian, not Ethan Reed. The account passed through 3 layers of charity companies, 2 art funds, and a family office in Zurich. But the final point led to a person we had allowed to leave the interview room with a lace handkerchief and blurred mascara. No one spoke. The silence then did not feel like surprise. It felt like realizing we had stared too long at a painting, while seeing only the frame. The second contract did not request the preservation of the Langford reputation. It requested the elimination of the entire direct line of inheritance. Victor had to truly die. Reed had to be silenced. Adrian had to disappear as a fleeing suspect. And the Eastbridge Bridge file had to be exposed just enough to freeze the board of directors. The final clause made Hale curse under his breath. The trust of the illegitimate child would activate temporary voting rights if Victor died. Adrian lost legal standing, and the appointed guardian appeared. Lucas read the clause again. Adrian does not have to be declared dead. If he is wanted for murder and corporate fraud, the estate court can suspend his claim long enough for temporary control to pass to the child's guardian. That guardian was Marianne. Hale understood before the rest of us did. She was not afraid of the child. No, she needed him. Marianne did not want to bury the scandal. She wanted the scandal to explode at the correct moment. She did not give us the USB because she was cornered. She gave it because the police were the cleanest tool to destroy Adrian. Reopen Eastbridge Bridge, freeze the family assets, and legalize her control through a child the entire city would pity. The true evil had not been hiding inside a ventilation duct. It sat beneath the white light of the interview room, weeping with the face of a victim, and let us move every piece to the square she had chosen. We returned to the Langford residence that same night. Marianne did not run. She sat in a living room as large as a private chapel, with a cold cup of tea before her and the lace handkerchief folded squarely on her lap. When Hale placed the arrest warrant on the table, she looked at it with almost polite exhaustion. "You arrived later than I expected." Hale stood still. "You killed your husband." Marianne smiled very faintly. "No, I merely paid for a service my husband had already ordered." Hale placed both palms on the table. "You let Adrian disappear. Adrian signed for the batch of materials that killed 17 people. You killed Reed." Marianne's fingers tightened around the white cloth. "Reed sold signatures, sold files, sold even his silence. He only chose the wrong buyer." I looked at her. The weakness on Marianne's face had vanished. Not because she had changed, but because she no longer needed to perform. The white light revealed the tiny wrinkles around her eyes. There was no madness there, no pleasure. Only greed trained to speak in the language of morality. And the child? Marianne's smile faded. "He will have a better future under the Langford name, under your control." Marianne lifted her gaze. "What is the difference?" That question chilled the room. To Marianne, people had never been complete people. Victor was a decaying asset. Adrian was a debt to erase. Reed was excess paperwork. The child was a key. And the night cleaners were logistics for a class accustomed to paying money to turn morality into accounting. Hale cuffed her. Marianne did not resist. As she passed me, her shoulder nearly brushed my sleeve. Marianne stopped just beside me. "Dr. Cross, you think you found the truth because the dead speak to you, but the dead can only give you the part they want you to hear." Victor was the same. I did not answer. Marianne let the last sentence arrive gently. "Do not pity him too much. He hired them before I did." She was taken away. Outside the mansion, rain began to fall. Police lights flashed red and blue across the wet road, beautiful enough to feel almost insulting to the dead. 1 week later, the official report was filed. Victor Langford had not died of a natural myocardial infarction. Ethan Reed was not the sole killer, nor was he the endpoint of the chain of events. Adrian Langford was no longer treated as a lone suspect, but he could not be called a clean victim either. Victor Langford, who had nearly been cremated as a respectable businessman, turned out to be the first person who paid to make his own death into a false indictment. Marianne Langford, who sobbed beneath the interview room lights, was the one who twisted that indictment into the final blade. The Eastbridge Bridge case was reopened. 17 names buried beneath concrete and false signatures finally returned to the light. But the night cleaners appeared in no final conclusion. No address, no leader, no membership list, only shell companies, vanished accounts, footage too clean, and the cold feeling that someone had mopped the floor before we had time to enter the room. Noah returned the last evidence tray to storage that evening. He looked older than he had on the night. Victor Langford arrived from the funeral home. So the lesson is not to trust the dead completely? I closed the storage drawer. No. The lesson is to make the dead prove even what they whisper. On the last night of the case, I returned to the forensic office alone. The city outside the window had stopped raining. High-rise buildings stood like upright tombstones in white light. I locked the door, shut down the computer, and placed the evidence bag containing the silver ash and my own hair into a private safe. Then I heard the hum. The air purifier in the corner was running. I remembered very clearly turning it off before I left. Yet the indicator on its body glowed green. Beneath it were the words "safe." I stood looking at those 2 words for a long time. In my profession, the dead often tell the truth, but they do not always tell the whole truth. Sometimes they tell only the part that benefits them. Sometimes they use their own death to keep controlling the living. And sometimes the cruelest living people do not need to run into darkness, because they know the white light of an interview room can also become a stage if the tears fall at the right time. I stepped forward, pulled the plug from the socket, and the hum died at once. The room became so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. Along the edge of the filter tray, a layer of silver dust so thin it almost did not exist clung in a small curve. Not enough to kill anyone. Not enough to accuse anyone. Only enough to prove that someone had once been very close to me. I did not sound the alarm. I did not run into the corridor. I did not give them the pleasure of seeing me afraid. I took out a new evidence bag, lifted the dust sample into it, sealed it, marked the time, and signed my name. Beneath the notes section, I wrote a single sentence. Evidence does not appear by itself. Out there, people would say the case was over. They needed to believe that in order to sleep. But I knew some deaths do not end when the body is buried, when the suspect is handcuffed, or when the file is closed. Some deaths only change shape. From a trace of blood at the corner of an eye, to a cough in a phone call, to a green indicator light, to a strand of hair in a filter, to a grain of dust in the wrong place. From that night on, I was no longer only the person who examined death. I had become the person watched by it. Some truths don't disappear when the story ends. They just stay hidden, waiting for someone to uncover them again. Thank you for listening until the very end. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves dark psychological mysteries. I'll see you in the next case, where the scariest thing may not be the killer, but the darkness inside people.